Hey, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further. My name is Jeremy, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast where we just want to ask the questions that we think that you would ask as it relates to Sunday's message. And as we do so, we hope that it helps you grow in your life and your faith. With that being said, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of the podcasts that are coming out. Not only that, hit the like button, because when you do so, it helps us help other people. And if you ever have a question about Sunday's content or about Overtime, you can submit those to overtime@npaustin.com, and we will be sure to get to those in future podcasts. So with that being said, here's a quick recap of Sunday, and then we're going to jump into our conversation today.
What do you do when adjusting isn't working and you find yourself in this season of waiting? There's this psychological term to describe what this is, and it's called liminal space. When you open the Bible, you find that there are stories and examples of people waiting all over the place. But one of the most notable examples of this is of a guy named Abram. He says, "I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth. Will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? Well, is anything too hard for the Lord?" A year later, God fulfills his promise. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age. How does this relate to my waiting, my liminal space season that I find myself in? The answer to that question is not emotionally satisfying. When it comes to the liminal spaces, the seasons of waiting that you might find yourself in, what does it look like for you to trust God?
I have no idea where this is going to go.
You're off to a great start.
Okay, so you ready?
Let's do it.
Are we ready?
Yes.
All right, so more money, more problems. You referenced this on Sunday,
Yep.
and I was jogging as I heard you say this, and I think I tripped. Maybe not. I tripped in my mind, not actually tripped and fell, but I was close.
Yeah.
Because I was like, "What is this?" I didn't know you were into rap music, and you were like a more money, more time, or more money, more problems guy, as you can tell I am.
Yeah, 100%. No, so I'm gonna be honest. I don't even know if I've heard the song, and I'm not against rap music. Yeah. It's not my. I like instrumental and classical and folk and indie music, and that's more my thing. And so I was really just, I don't know, when I was writing, and I was like, man, it could be great to use a comedic relief right here.
Yeah.
At this point in the message, and
I thought you handled it so well then, knowing what I know. I mean,
yeah.
it flowed really well. Like you didn't even pause. Like I paused here just trying to say more money, more problems.
Well, every time I practiced it, it would go more money, more problems is how it would come out. And I'm like, no, it's mo. So yeah, it was not authentic at all. I'm going to be honest.
You did a great job though.
Yeah.
I didn't know that until now.
I'm glad I was able to trip you up mid jog though.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. It was entertaining.
Yeah.
The other thing I was thinking about when I was thinking about Sunday's message was you said you've been a father for 10 months. I think during this message, right?
Yeah, just about. I think I said almost 10. So yeah, I think this weekend will be 10 months, just about. Yeah.
Right. I heard that and I was like, that is crazy.
Yeah.
Like 10 months. So as an experienced father, like an experienced sailor,
I get this question a lot. Yeah.
I would go like, what are the one or two pieces of advice that you would give all of us fathers around the world, knowing what you know now after 10 months?
Interesting. I think the number one I would give is a Bob Goff quote, but it's been something I've held on to.
Yeah.
And that is, be where your feet are. And it's just like a be present. Like there's many times I'm exhausted and I'm putting like this past week, we just switched to where I've been putting Grayson down, giving him a bottle. And, this past week I was really tired, really like, okay, if I'm honest, I was like, okay, I want to put Grayson down. I'm going to make an old fashioned and I'm going to sit at the TV and we're going to watch a movie. And like, that is going to be so nice.
Yes.
And, but I would give him a bottle. He'd pass out in my arms and I would just go, be where your feet are. I would just rock him for 15 minutes and he's already out. But for me as a dad, it was just like, hey, there's going to be a day where you really wish you could do this. And then after that 15 minutes, I'm like, man, that was a great moment. That was one of the highlights of my day.
That's fantastic.
And so hopefully that stays. But I'm sure later on when putting him down is not nearly as nice.
Yes.
I'm sure I'll change, but I just think,
be where your feet are.
Yeah, and it really was as a result of having conversations with a number of dads, and you were one of them, where I was asking him 2 questions, like if you could go back and to the years when you became a dad and tell yourself something, what would you say? And the resounding answer I got then was like time, like it goes fast, and that's the stereotypical parent answer. But okay, cool, notable. Let me take note of that. This is gonna happen faster than I think. So let me try to enjoy every single moment. And then too, I had asked, what's the goal of parenting?
Yeah.
And that was super interesting. That's a whole nother podcast.
Right.
But
that's fantastic. Well, as you were saying that, I was with Sam, my oldest son, yesterday. Yeah. And we were talking about all kinds of things. We're shopping. He's looking for a car and all this stuff. And one of the things, we were driving back from Dallas, and I said, it fit the context, but I said, sometimes I wish I could just put you back in a bottle and we could just restart from the very beginning. I was like, I'm so excited for your future and what God's doing in your life and the man you are. But there are times I wish, man, knowing what I know today, that I could just start fresh. And we had a great conversation as a result. But I think one of the things I would absolutely do that I didn't do very well was be where my feet are. So I love that advice.
Well, cool.
I received that.
Oh, thank you. Yes. And it's just I literally, if anybody's like, be where your feet are. What does that look like?
Yeah.
Wherever you're at, stomp your feet. Because there's a physical sensation that hits your brain where you're like, oh, I'm present. I'm right here in this moment.
Got to be present.
And it's a really good kind of reminder.
Gosh, that's fantastic. Yeah. It's something you just won't regret. It's like being present.
Yep.
Well, thank you for that advice. After 10 months, I feel like there it is. You have these deep kind of, soulish insights of life.
Oh, man. Well, hopefully they're good.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I love it.
Apparently, I'm not going to know whether I was a good parent until he's 40 or something, right? Isn't there that statistic?
Yeah, that quote. I was like, wait till your kids are in their 40s. And then you're like, okay, I think parenting may have worked out. I don't know.
Yeah. So I'm 1.5% of the way there.
Yeah, you're getting there.
Yeah.
Time goes fast. Yep. You've heard that.
Yep. Thank you.
Well, hey, I'm excited that the roles are reversed a little bit today.
Yes.
And I am on this end asking the questions, kind of going a little bit further and deeper into the conversation.
Yep.
Or, part 5 of our series.
Which is very strange because I've been on the other side of you asking questions for 10 years now, I think. Yeah. So for you to ask me, it's just, it's bizarre.
Well, you're the guy you're next to it was 5, 6, 7 podcasts ago that we were talking about the scripture that talked about deep waters, that, hey, I'm going to pull, these deep things out of your soul and you're that guy. So I'm excited to hear these deep insights that you're going to give, all of us today.
Awesome. Zero expectation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just real quick, if you haven't been part of the series, just kind of capture a little bit of what we've been talking about. We've said, how in the world can we put wind in our sails, in life and in our marriage, relationships, dating relationships, parenting relationships, financially, morally, spiritually with God. How do we begin to, make these adjustments in life and adjustments with our sails to put wind in our sails to experience what Jesus invited us into, which is life and life to the full. Mm-hmm. And I think regardless if you're a Jesus follower or not, we want a full life. And so this has been that whole series. We're talking about it in part 1. We talked about you got to own your piece of the past. If you're going to make peace with the past, you have to start there. Part 2, we talked about renewing your mind. Hey, we can change a lot of things externally, but what's going on internally? Part 3, Jordan talked about prioritizing the most important things. Make sure, keep the kind of the big rocks, if you will, and stay out of the weeds. Part 4, I talked about you got to, what do you do with the piece of the past that you can't own that somebody else did, and the whole idea of forgiveness. And then you talked about in part 5, this whole idea of what do you do when you're, making all these efforts or trying to adjust your sails, but as much as you may adjust your sails, nothing is happening. No wind is coming into your sails and you're just stuck. And it feels like, man, what do you do when there seems like there is nothing you can do? And I thought you did a great job. So FYI, just my personal opinion. And as I listened to it, almost tripped when you reference your comment. Yep. But overall, I felt like, man, you gave us some great insights. So I want to take it further today. And the first question I've got is, why do you think God has us wait? It feels like sometimes God, you don't have to do this. You can give me what I want now. You can put wind in my sails now. But why does he make us wait? What do you think?
Yeah, well, this question feels like it can open a lot of cans of worms. So I just want to be careful with it.
Multiple worms.
Yeah, because there's anytime you start talking about suffering or anything like that, it's in the lane of, why do bad things happen to good people?
Sure.
And, we've done podcasts on that question before ad nauseum. Like, we've talked about it a lot. It's a great question. That's really important. But this more in the line of, why is like waiting part of the process, I guess, in our relationship with God? And I think it's really important to differentiate between, God causing something to happen and God using something that is happening. Because so often we go like, why would God let this happen? But you can get into some waters around the sovereignty of God, where you have Calvinism, which is, God is making everything happen, and free will. We don't really have free will, but we kind of, and then Arminian side of things, which is like, no, we do have a lot of free will, and God is still, there's just this like super gray space you get into. And so I think at the heart of this question, I think it's just good to know, like, that's a whole can of worms that you can get into. But I think the biggest thing is God, I think God using difficult things that happen, regardless of whether or not, we believe he causes them or he doesn't, or how all that works. The thing that we know to be true is God uses difficult waiting things over and over and over and over again to draw us closer to him. And I love 2 Corinthians 12 when Paul talks about, Paul is the guy who, he was so dang smart. He's the Pharisee. He had every reason to be like, I'm Paul, look who I am. I know all of it. And he wrote half the New Testament, but he finds himself in waiting situations all the time.
Oh yeah.
The amount of times he's stuck at sea, the amount of times he's in jail. When he eventually dies, like, so much waiting. And he talks about this thorn in his side in 2 Corinthians 12. And I think it so well describes the waiting and why we find ourselves in waiting, because he never gives us clarity about what this thing is. We don't know if it's a physical ailment or a mental ailment or something like that. But I'm just going to read what he says and comment on it. But he says, therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh to torment me. And he says it's a messenger of Satan. Now, that's a whole nother conversation there as well. But he says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. And then this last part is, I think really helpful for answering this question. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And he's essentially saying, hey, it's in my weakness that it makes room in my life for God's strength to come in. It's when he thinks he's strong, when he thinks he has it all figured out, is when he actually falls short. And so why does God have us wait? Well, oftentimes it's because that's where his power, his strength, his love is made perfect in our lives in a way. Without us waiting, oftentimes we completely miss God working in something.
Right. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and as you were talking, it also reminded me like of a farming analogy, like the whole idea of like, hey, I've done everything, I've planted, I've watered, I've done everything. I just can't make it grow. And oftentimes it's in the waiting, it's in the patience, it's in all those kind of things that the fruit grows. And I think sometimes, God is actually doing that. Like, that's what Paul discovered. He's like, it sucks to wait. I hate it, and there are things like there are hardships, there are difficulties, there are things I wish would come to an end. But what I've learned is that there is fruit being produced in the midst of waiting. And that fruit, I'm just telling you, is glorious, is wonderful, is actually doing things that are far better in my life, but it wouldn't have happened without the waiting.
Yep. And I think oftentimes too, the fruit is both producing something good, but also getting rid of something that is bad.
Yeah.
And I mentioned this like briefly on Sunday. It's like, in the waiting, we are forced to confront some really terrible truths about ourselves, or be humbled about some things. And oftentimes there are things that throughout our childhood or growing up, we put on as a shield to protect ourselves or to help our self-worth, because we couldn't find that anywhere else, so we have to muster that up on our own. Well, those are the very things that we need to let go of, and the very things that get in the way of us truly connecting with God and being in that intimate relationship with him. And I want to quote Pete Scazzero in Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, which has just been a book I've gone back to over and over and over again, kind of even just throughout the series as we've been going through it. But he talks about this dark night of the soul, and we've talked about that before. And it's this period sometimes that God takes us through, when it could be various things. It could be multiple times throughout our life. I mean, I've heard you talk about having gone through maybe one or two of these at least, and I would say I've gone through maybe one. I would reference one, particular time, but he says it's God's way of retiring and purging our affections and passions, that we might delight in his love and enter into a richer, fuller communion with him. And there's a lot of spiritual imperfections. He talks about pride and avarice and luxury, wrath, spiritual gluttony, envy. He says sloth, which is like running from difficult things. And it's in the waiting that God kind of purges and refines, these kind of things.
Yeah. And it does get in a little bit like you described as the can of worms, to go, if God actually knows that's what it produces. In other words, he wants you to experience that intimacy, that relational intimacy that you can experience, that oneness in a marriage, or that relational intimacy with your kids, or that closeness with your kids, or he wants you to experience that joy and contentment in life. He understands that, like, to get there, if that's the desire, like, there's some things that are going to need to be purged, and in order for those things to purge, it's going to take time, and it's going to take circumstances. So there is a good in the midst of what we can perceive bad.
Yep.
That if we're willing to trust him in the midst of that, like you said at the end of the message, you were like, all these messages come down to this one word, trust.
Yeah.
Like, God is actually active. He is working. He is doing something, as Paul said.
Yep.
In the midst of that, which is great.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I love that. Anything else you would add to that, or?
No, I mean, there's one thing I wrote down that I just find interesting. I think in the, there's a specific to what types of, things God purges. I think a big one is just our narcissism, our selfishness. Kind of, we're just naturally wired that way, and oftentimes in the refining, God is getting rid of some of that. And I love Richard Rohr. He talks about 5 essential truths for every man to discover, and they're depressing, but they're like important to learn, because
you're smiling about this as you're like, these are depressing,
yes.
and you're smiling.
But these are the 5 truths, and I think you discover these truths in the waiting, in that life is hard. Yeah. You are not that important. Your life is not about you. You are not in control, and you are going to die. And he said those 5 essential truths, when you accept those things to be true, it actually produces something fruitful in you, because you begin to live for something bigger than yourself.
Right.
So I just think more specific to selfishness, God prunes that quite a bit.
Yeah, so much of what he just said, or what you just read, produces humility. And humility is such a key to be able to see people, to be able to listen, to be able to, receive things. It's a big deal. So, perhaps God is allowing the waiting space to reveal some areas that need to be humbled, and those truths, the 5 essential truths that Richard was talking about, so you can actually receive something good on the other end of that. And that's what you were saying in 1 Corinthians 12, what Paul is talking about. Man, this is, in my weakness, like, I am discovering something that is so much more profound.
Yep.
Yeah. That's good.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I want you to think about something else. The second question is, how can we learn to be more okay in the uncomfortable waiting? So I want to squirm. I want to fix it. I want, my personality is, man, I want to, like, get busy, get active, like, get out of this situation. But how can we start to become more comfortable with that?
Yeah, I think part of this, I just thought of this too, is a decision to do it. as simple as that might be. Ashley and I, this was actually, I don't know, 3-4 years before we were married, we just went through something together as 18-year-olds that we had to make a really difficult decision, and it was a very humbling decision. It was it's a marker moment in our story. And I say this because we just had dinner with a couple this past week, and they were asking about our life, and we shared this part of our story, and they were like, "Oh my goodness!" And I was like, "Yeah, well, it seems like such a small thing back then, but really, when I think about it, that was a moment where we both decided," and then we'll reference that from now on, that no matter what is going on, no matter how difficult it is, no matter how uncomfortable it is, like, we are going to make a decision to face it. We're going to deal with the pain, because we recognize that dealing with the pain produces something really, really rich and intimate on the other end of it. And so I think that's part of it. It's just, making a decision. Like, are you going to be someone who faces the difficult things that come your way in life? And then, I referenced in the message Samuel Chan, and he writes a book, Leadership Pain. That's a great book.
Love it.
A lot more leadership focused and, like, ministry focused. And I think if somebody reads it, they might just go like, oh my goodness, people in ministry are so jacked up.
Yeah, I would, because we read it as a leadership team.
Yeah.
And like, I think people would pray for us more.
Yeah. Yeah.
if they read the book. But if you're a business leader too, I would highly recommend the book because there's lots of, parallel lessons or, transferable lessons in business as well.
Yeah. The adage of, what is it? The church is a hospital for sinners, and the doctors are sometimes the worst.
Yeah.
I've heard somebody say that before.
Yeah.
But anyways, but he says in the book, pain isn't the enemy. The inability or unwillingness to face pain is a far greater danger. Because when you do that, you end up missing things that can perhaps grow you to experience better things in life. So
yeah, especially if there really is the end of that, like if God is looking at that going like, I so desire you, Jeremy, to experience that incredible intimacy in your relationship. I so desire you to finally have security as a man and feel what that feels like. But in order for you to experience that, like the pain is a necessary bridge.
Yep.
You have to cross that. You have to make that decision. And you can begin to, put pieces together then to go, perhaps God is working all things for the good. We just don't have the perspective and context that God does.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the other things too, when you're in the waiting, one of the things that's been helpful for me oftentimes is having like handles to hold on to. And these are statements or concepts or principles or pieces of scripture that when I'm bumping into something difficult in the waiting, I can go back to it over and over and over again. And so, one of those is, I mentioned on Sunday, it's Psalm 40, Psalm 40, 1-3 or 1-5. And that's one that I read it and then I've held on to it ever since. And it's been one I've gone back to over and over. It's not like, oh, I read that once and wow, that was great. It's like, no. I read that like every day for a month, just to allow that, like those truths to internalize and sink down from my head to my heart.
Well, I remember just behind the scenes a little bit to give, if you're watching or listening, when we were talking about part 5, and we were just brainstorming, throwing spaghetti noodles at the wall a little bit. That was one that you just brought up. You were like, I don't know how it's going to fit, but this has got to be part of part 5 is Psalms 40. And it just felt like, man, that has so much energy for you. And I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, one of the things, sometimes it's just processing, what do I need to hear in this to help me keep going? What do I need to be reminded of? What truths do I need to hold on to help me kind of take steps? And so, one of my mantras that I say oftentimes is this 4 line thing, and it's worse than I think it is, but my entire sense of self is in Christ, so I can be faithful to what God has called me to do because I am enough, and the same power that raised Christ from the dead lives in me. And that's just a 4-line thing that I wrote one day that it was
Where'd you get that?
Just added up a bunch of things, I guess. I don't know.
Just all the dots connected in your mind?
Well, it's worse than I think it is my counselor says that. My entire sense of self is in Christ. That's from Brendan Manning.
Yeah.
I can be faithful to God, what God has called me to do. That's probably you. I am enough, and the same power that raised Christ from the dead lives in me. That's Paul. So just kind of combining these things together. But that's what my point is. It's handles.
Yeah.
It's just whenever you're facing something, it's a handle to hold on to.
Right.
And a super simple one that I would just give to anybody who is trying to discover what it means to trust God in whatever they're facing is so often we think we need to trust God with the entire future, but that's a lot sometimes. Sometimes we just need to recognize that God gives us enough grace for today, and we need to say, you know what, God, I'm going to trust you with the outcome of today. And if that's all you can say right now, that is okay.
Yeah.
And then tomorrow get up. God, I'm going to trust you with the outcome of today. And maybe that's a handle. Maybe that's something that you can hold on to wherever you might be. If you're going, man, I don't know about the next year, just try today. Just try to trust God with today and then see what he gives you as you're doing that day after day after day.
Yeah, man, that's good. I love that. I think I would add just one more is just in the midst of if, it's uncomfortable, it may be painful, you're waiting is the idea to go, you're not alone. I think so many times in my personal life, just ability, there's a mutual friend of ours that, I can pick up the phone, he and I can go grab a beer. We can go, to breakfast. We can, and that, man, I am waiting for the outcome of this. This is incredibly difficult. I so wish this away from my life, but it's here, it's present. And, just to be able to go, but I'm not alone. I can process these thoughts. I can be vulnerable. I can be human. I don't have to filter. I don't have to carry this weight alone. I have stumbled. I'm going through hardship, and there's someone that totally gets me and loves me exactly where I'm at and can remind me to be human and also remind me to just trust God with the todays, as you said, and not, try to put all all of that, figure it all out. So
yeah.
I think that's really important to know you're not alone as well.
Yeah, and hopefully people, listening on the podcast pick up on a trend that like the answer to at least one question every week is like other people.
Yes.
Community. It's just, you can't get away from it.
No.
It is you cannot grow in isolation.
Well, so much of that, like even the discoveries in what you're sharing, I mean, you've learned on the other side of individuals, you've learned on the other side of counselors, mentors, friends, even books, which are kind of like mentoring from a distance, and all of that is really important in community. So love it. All right. So what about this one? Question 3, talk more about the seeds of doubt in the liminal space. So I know you mentioned this on Sunday. What does that mean? Can you give us more context to that?
Yeah, so seeds of doubt would be like, lies that kind of make their way into our hearts and our minds as we're going through something difficult in the waiting. And those are the things that are, I can never be happy again, or, nothing good can come from this, or there's no point in continuing. Those are the seeds of doubt to go like, I'm gonna look for a shortcut. I'm gonna look for something to get me out of this, or a quick fix, to make me feel good right now. And seeds of doubt, I think, are things you kind of have to, we've talked about it a lot on this podcast, but take every thought captive and make it obedient to Christ. And the reason you can do that is really important. It's not just because it's a good self-help technique. Like, I think that's really key. Like, it is what Brandon Manning talks about, his combination of faith and hope to get to trust. Taking thoughts captive and making them obedient to Christ is going, hey, this is a thought that's untrue. I'm going to submit this to you, God. And you don't do that just because it's a nice feeling and it's a self-help technique. No, you do that because of faith in the person of Jesus. And this is from Sunday. You combine faith in the person of Jesus. Because he is who he claimed to be. We can trust everything else that he said. And he gave a lot of promises. So now we can trust that his promises will come true. And there's an expectation of fulfillment. And when you combine those two things, you find yourself in that posture to trust. And you can trust God in the midst of whatever's going on. And that's the foundation upon which you can take thoughts captive, make them obedient to Christ, and then flip it around, flip the script, change the way you're saying it, tell yourself a different story, which is, essentially, from I can't be, or what was it? What did I just say? Nothing good can come from this to there's something good that can come from this to there's no point in continuing to there's purpose in this pain, to I'll never be happy again to I can be happy. Like, it's flipping the script around in that way. And it's just through faith, through hope, in trusting, taking those things captive. That's kind of how I would tackle kind of seeds of doubt in the liminal space.
Yeah, that's great. I think that I would just add the same kind of context is, I think in the midst of like those, doubts and those thoughts that creep in, being in community, being connected is so important. I've said it for others, and people said it for me. Like, there are times that I just have an inability to flip the script. There are times I have an inability. I'm so sunk. I'm so, I've lost so much hope that anything good could come from this, that the doubts are now sinking into like a deep reality to where because I've been connected, people have been able to say, Buck, I know you're in that space. I know that the doubts have become true to you, but can you borrow my faith? Because either they have been there, they have walked alongside of people who have been there, they know that the doubts have sunk to a place that feels like reality, and they're able to give me hope that I otherwise wouldn't have without having a relationship with them. And so like those statements to go, hey, I understand. I'm with you. You're totally human to say that and do that. But would you be willing to borrow my faith that there could be a better day to come? Yep. That maybe God is doing something good in the midst of what feels incredibly difficult. And I also think, the question we've talked about here at Northpoint, and the question, my counselor asks me all the time, is being in community allows somebody to ask the question with a doubt, who told you that? Whose voice is that? Where did that come from that there's absolutely no way this is going to work out? Where did that come from that this is all your fault? Where did that come from that there is no hope? Whose voice is that? And oftentimes we identify, that's like we said in question 1, is why does God, seem like he creates this space, this waiting space, this, gosh, I wish things would get better. It's because God is actually doing something in the midst of that. And when we have somebody in our life to identify, hey, where's that voice coming from? Maybe we identify that's from, my mom, that's from my dad, that's from a deep insecurity, and God needs to purge that so you can experience something better. And if you weren't waiting, if you weren't in that kind of that hard place in life, that wouldn't be purged. And if you didn't have that person on the other side of you to say, hey, whose voice is that? Who's saying that? Because that doesn't sound like the voice of your Heavenly Father. That sounds much more like the voice of perhaps your dad. That sounds much more like the voice of your mom. Having somebody to do that helps with those doubts and go, oh, that's where those doubts have come from. That's where that voice comes from, and can really help purge so you can experience what God has for you on the other side of that.
Yeah.
So,
and I think, when you're feeling the seeds of doubt in liminal space, most likely it is hard to think objectively about things.
So hard.
You're just in the weeds, and that's okay. I mean, you're just feeling things, and like Manning says, like emotions are neither good or bad, just an indicator of what's going on inside of us. And so often we just need a little help to help figure out what's going on inside of us, and to purge those things, the good and the bad, and what's true and not true. And I don't know, if anybody does anything as a result of this podcast, maybe it's just, being willing to go, hey, I need help, and asking that question. Well, a trusted friend, a mentor, someone, a pastor here on staff, just saying, hey, like I just need help. Yeah. Like that's such an amazing step to take if you find yourself in the waiting.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. If you're stuck financially, if you're stuck, emotionally, if you're stuck morally, it's a habit you just cannot break. If you're stuck in a marriage, you feel like definitely, call Northpoint. Yep. Email Northpoint. Just say, hey, I'm stuck. I'd love to have somebody on the other side of me to help me get unstuck, because sometimes you just need that new information or that connection.
Absolutely.
So on Sunday, you talked about God interacting with Abraham and, Sarah and all this kind of stuff. And then you had to wait an additional 10 years and all these kind of things. And it felt like, God made a promise, but he wasn't specific on his promise. He was vague. So I'm curious, question 4, why is God so vague? Why doesn't he just tell Abraham and be more specific?
Yeah. I think this one is maybe simple but not satisfying.
Sure.
In that if we have all the information and we understand the outcome, there's no room for needing to trust anymore. It's like if God is trying to purge us of something, if he's trying to refine something in us through trust, giving us clarity is not going to get us there. And that's super hard. And I just don't think we're super built to have the clarity. I mean, think about having kids and, in my, again, 10 months of experience.
I know. You've got the wisdom now.
Yeah. I know there's going to be a day though when I have to go hey, I know you don't get it, but just trust me, Grayson. I know you're mad, I know you're angry, but just trust me. You know what I mean? It's we're not ready for the clarity. If we're, if we are like our kids in that moment. So I just think, clarity is often the antithesis of trust.
Yes. I can think of so many parenting examples exactly as you were saying, to go if I have my best interest of my sons in mind and I was able to, and I do give them clarity, they're still going to reject it. Well, why, Dad? That doesn't make any sense. How could that be? And it's because I have a bigger picture in mind. I have more life experience, and maybe I've got, 20 years on them. And I think that's really important with God is keeping in mind that he's got, all eternity upon us.
Yeah.
And he's got such context. And if God is good, and if God is love, and ultimately if he's going to work out all things for the good, either in this life or the life to come, and we'll see that, then it does, as you're saying, require trust. And even if he was specific, there are times we just cannot hear it because what's going on in our lives, and we're going to reject his specific, things he has to say. And maybe he's purging those things in our life so we can actually hear him a little bit more clearly. And so he's got to be general.
Yeah.
And just say, trust me.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, think about I don't know, one of your 15-year-old sons. No, you don't have.
I've got 17, 18, and 19, and then almost 14-year-old twins.
Hey, I also just wanted to check in on second service. This is total side note. I really clarified on stage that you love your children. Yes. But I don't think any of your children were in that service, so they didn't hear that.
No, all my kids really think I didn't want them now. Thanks,
really?
Jeremy.
Oh,
no.
Yeah. Well, I saw Tim sitting right there, and I was like, man.
If you weren't in first service, for those of you listening or watching, Jeremy said, Buck has told me not to have 5 children. And so it was something like that.
Yeah.
And so my kids were in first service, And I'm thinking, like, between services, I was talking to you, and I was like, I think they're probably thinking Dad told Jeremy, don't have 5 kids because he didn't want one of us. Like, which one was it? Was it 2 of us? Was it 3 of us? So anyways, I told him I wanted them all. It just is a lot.
That's
it's
good.
A lot.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep. So anyways, I got so tripped up second service that I was like, I just want to clarify, Buck loves his children. I said that. So anyway, just wanted to fix first service. But it's wild to think that, like, let's say a 15-year-old son and you are 45, 44?
46.
46. So 16 and 46 or whatever, like 30 more years of life experience, and you have so much more context to offer that in our teenage years we're not able to see, prefrontal cortex, lack of life experience, like all of those things. Right. And just think about, like, us, less than a century in the span of God, eternity. Like, he has so much more context than we do.
Yeah, and I ask that question to my boys all the time. Could it be possible that maybe I do love you right now? Could it be possible that maybe I have your best interest in mind? Could it be possible that there's something good on the other end of what I'm asking you to wait upon? And, I think with God, if we can just put those questions in there, could it be possible that God is really for you? Could it be possible God is still loving, and he has something that the outcome is going to be good and loving, but he's asking you to trust him right now? Yep. And I think those are great questions. Yep. Well, to wrap it up, I've got question number 5. To talk further about the idea of false expectation, the thought that changing something externally will change the uncomfortability internally.
Yeah, I think we do this on a small scale a lot. This is like coping mechanisms 101, right? Like, I'm having a bad day, let me eat something, and that's going to fix it because this tastes good.
Guilty.
Yep. I think I had Torchies for lunch, so I think I did that today. I went from counseling to Torchies on the way home, actually. So, already did that. But we do that on a small scale, but we do it on a really big scale as well. And I think oftentimes we miss out on something significant. God gives us free will. I mean, that's, again, a can of worms, but God gives us free will. And oftentimes, if we lean in his direction on the moments when we have a choice to do so or not, we discover something great. But oftentimes we go like, well, the easy fix, though, is if I can change this big external thing. And I mentioned some of those. Some people change jobs. Some people change cities. They leave their families. They change spouses. They make a big purchase that they can't afford, buy a house, like whatever it might be. Sometimes they want to make a big change external. That's exciting. That's fun for a minute, but it leaves you just right where you were internally. You got to go through the crucible of trial and waiting. You can't shortcut because God teaches you something significant in the waiting. And Judd Wilhite, a pastor in Las Vegas, says, if you shortcut the struggle, you shortchange the breakthrough. And that just summarizes it. I mean, you just can't, don't take an external shortcut. Just allow yourself to sit there. Again, going back to making peace with pain and going, I'm right where God wants me. I'm going to trust you with the outcome of today and the outcome of tomorrow.
That's so tough to do.
Yeah.
Everything in us wants to, like, scream out, like, I've got to change this because I'm so tired of struggling. I'm so tired of hurting. I'm so tired of waiting.
Yep.
But ultimately, I do think it's where our confidence lies. And if our confidence lies in a God that is for us and who loves us and who has demonstrated that by giving his son to punctuate the fact that he is for us and that he is working all things for the good, and these outcomes to experience what Christ invited us to experience, life and life to the full, are going to require us to wait and experience some things so that we can actually receive the things God has for us. Then I think that potentially can help us not take matters into our own hands and make these big, external changes.
Yep, for sure. For sure.
Well, Jeremy, this was fun.
Yes.
Being on this side, hanging out on the other side of you. Thank you again for Sunday. I thought you did a fantastic job. And the further insights into our discussion today, I think, are really going to help us, in the midst of life. And life, in the midst of life, we will have to wait. And so thank you again for your time.
For sure.
All right, man.